Well, we're back here in the room that brought the first hearing to the Albanian people of Kosova. This is the committee room for the International Relations Committee, and if you can pan around, you'll see Congressman Hyde's picture. He's the current chairman, and the former chairman, Congressman Gilman. These are Republicans, and you're going to see our Democrat friends today as well, Congressman Lantos. Why do I mention those three in particular? Because they're the ones that have consistently introduced the resolutions for the independence for Kosova. And even this year, on January 5, Congressman Hyde and Congressman Lantos introduced HRES 24 for the independence of Kosova now. And today, May 18th, we're having a hearing at which the U.S. State Department, the Bush administration, is going to disclose their policy on Kosova. There was an article yesterday in the Washington Post that said that Bush has finally decided that we cannot wait any longer on Kosova, and he's now going to start a process, hopefully ending in a year or two, where Kosova would be independent. The State Department is not saying they support independence yet, but it's obvious that that's the only solution that's going to work, because that's what the Albanian people of Kosova want. That's what they declared in their referendum in 1990 under international law. It's called self-determination. And today we have representatives of the Albanian people to make that case directly. One of the key representatives is Bishop Mark Sopi. He's with us. He's the bishop of the Catholic community, the diocese in Prizren, and he's going to tell us the reality of Albanians in Kosova today. And welcome, Bishop, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will try to say the real situation in Kosovo.
Good, and we look forward to hearing your testimony. We also have Father Sean Zeffi, who is going to submit testimony for the record. Just say hello for the crowd in Albanian.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Përshëndesme.
Okay. Good to thank you for coming. And Father Luis Georgi. He's going to be testifying. He's the official biographer of Mother Teresa.
Dëshirojmë nëpërmes Nallës Tereze të paraqesim kishën dhe popullin ton për paqe dhe bashkëjetesë me të gjithë.
Thank you for being with us.
The Balkans region has been an area of tremendous concern since the early 1900s. In recent years, the attention of the United States has been diverted to other geostrategic priorities. However, 2005 is an exceptionally important year for the people of the Balkans. Today, this committee considers the most critical issue in the Balkans, the question of Kosovo. In 1999, NATO intervened militarily in the former Yugoslavia. It's important and significant to ask why the final status of Kosovo was left undetermined at that time. The current status of Kosovo, or Kosova as it is also known as, is governed by UN Security Council Resolution 1244. The purpose of this hearing today is to assess the current situation in Kosovo and to consider U.S. administration policies towards Kosovo and its future status. I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses, and at this time, I'm pleased to recognize our distinguished ranking Democratic member, Mr. Lantos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank you for your continuing leadership on this very important issue. I also want to thank you for joining me in sponsoring House Resolution 24, which expresses the sense of the House of Representatives that the United States should support the independence of Kosovo. I firmly believe that the position our resolution advocates is the only way to bring lasting stability and prosperity to this region. At the outset, let me also pay tribute to our extraordinary Secretary of State, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, and to Secretary Burns for their leadership on this issue. I had the privilege of reading Secretary Burns' statement, which he will come to in a few minutes. I find it extremely constructive, and I'm sure this committee, on a bipartisan basis, will look forward to working with you, Ms. Secretary, and with Secretary Rice in achieving our common goal. The basic issue that we are facing is simple. The current status quo of limbo is not sustainable. And unless it is changed, and changed clearly and resolutely, we will have renewed ethnic violence, and the integration of Kosovo into Europe will be further delayed. There is a very positive outcome to this crisis, and that, of course, is the full integration of Kosovo as an independent, democratic, multi-ethnic country into an integrated Europe. That is the goal we seek, and that is the goal we shall achieve. There are few issues, Mr. Chairman, on which I have been as deeply engaged as the issue of Kosovo. I am convinced that the only way to address the problem of the political, economic, and social instability that plagues the Balkans and to prevent renewed violence in the region is to grapple without delay with the issue of Kosovo's final status. Under Slobodan Milosevic, the Serbian government dismantled Kosovo's political institutions. Before the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, Kosovo was an autonomous province. Under Milosevic, Kosovars were subjected to systematic persecution and discrimination. Ethnic Albanians were replaced by Serbs in most jobs. Serb-owned firms took over Albanian-owned companies, and Albanians were prohibited from purchasing or improving property. I traveled to Kosovo many times as this was taking place, so my knowledge of these facts is not book knowledge. It stems from personal, first-hand experience, as Mrs. Lantos and I made repeated trips to Kosovo. I will never forget when I spoke before, on one occasion, a large group that spontaneously gathered in the main square of Pristina in May of 1990. My wife Annette and I were greeted with joy by the people because we represented the United States of America. The crowd chanted, "USA, USA," while the Serbian police were beating Albanians at the edge of the crowd. Years later, all of us watched in horror at the mass devastation of ethnic Albanians by Serb paramilitary forces with the support of the Milosevic government. Kosovars were killed, their homes were burned and pillaged, and hundreds of thousands were made homeless. All of us remember the scenes on CNN in 1999 as Albanians were forced out of their homeland. We watched old ladies with babies in their arms and pregnant women forced across the borders. It was one of the most horrific sights I witnessed since the Holocaust. Since our successful military action, the international community has joined Kosovars in rebuilding their country, revitalizing their economy, establishing democratic institutions of self-government, and attempting to heal the scars of war. Currently, Kosovo remains a United Nations protectorate, but further progress is hindered by the uncertainty about its final political status. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, the problems continue to be extremely serious. Unemployment rate stands over 60%. The economic crisis increases the likelihood that Kosovars, 50% of whom are under the age of 25, will either enter criminal networks or will leave to find work abroad in order to survive. The perpetuation of these economic conditions heightens the potential for continued instability in the region, and this undermines our vital interests in the Balkans. Achieving genuine long-term political and economic stability requires more than reconstruction assistance. It demands a resolution of the political status of Kosovo. International private investment and even loans from the World Bank are delayed or not even considered because of questions about the long-term status of Kosovo. Mr. Chairman, you personally expressed the link with special eloquence in December of 2002, when you said, and I quote, "There will be no jobs without peace and stability in Kosovo, but there will be no peace and stability without independence," end quote. I could not agree more. Under the Yugoslav Constitution of 1974, Kosovo was the functional equivalent in most ways to Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and Macedonia, the other republics of the former Yugoslavia. As an autonomous province, Kosovo exercised the same powers as a republic. It had its own parliament, high courts, central bank, police force, and local defense elements. Through constitutional change in 1968, Kosovo was recognized as a constituent element of the Yugoslav federal system. When Slovenia and Croatia demanded independence in 1991, Western European governments, including our own Department of State and the White House, opposed recognizing the right of those republics to self-determination. I remember marching at Union Square with my Croatian friends demanding independence for Croatia, while the State Department and the White House indicated that Yugoslavia will persist forever. Eventually, our government and the rest of the world acknowledged the independence of Slovenia and Croatia, and later the independence of Bosnia-Herzegovina and Macedonia as well. These four republics are now members of the United Nations. Slovenia is a member of NATO and the European Union, and Croatia is on its way to entering the European Union and NATO. I am confident that the other constituent units of the former Yugoslavia will eventually all become members of both the European Union and NATO. So there is light at the end of this tunnel. In the 1990s, we found that self-determination for Slovenia and Croatia involved not so much a change of borders as a change in the status of existing borders. The lines on the map remained the same, but their status was upgraded from constituent republic within a federation to an independent nation. This has contributed to the stability and progress of these countries. Mr. Chairman, Kosovo is entitled to precisely the same treatment. There must be no double standard. When Slovenia and Croatia, Bosnia and Macedonia were admitted to the United Nations, there was no talk of standards before status. Unfortunately, this has become a slogan for delay and indecision as it relates to Kosovo. The result is that for the past 6 years, there has been no serious discussion of the status of Kosovo, and the United States and our European allies have watched as the economy has floundered and as ethnic tensions have escalated. This led to severe violence and bloodshed. The region hovered on the brink of further bloodshed and conflict, and it still festers today. As strongly as I was opposed to discrimination and persecution of Kosovar Albanians, I am equally as strongly opposed to discrimination against and persecution of Serbs and Roma remaining in Kosovo. Anyone with any understanding of the region knows that there is no way that Kosovo can return to the status of a province of Serbia. I can't emphasize this strongly enough. This is not an option. The overwhelming majority of the population of Kosovo is ethnic Albanians who have vivid memories of Serb violence and atrocities just a few years ago. Recognition of Kosovo's independence must be done in such a way that the Serb population is fully assured that all their rights will be fully protected. There can be no compromise on that issue. This will require for a while a continued international presence. Such an international presence will also be helpful as Kosovo's political institutions and political leaders achieve a greater degree of maturity. But now is the time to take the next inevitable but crucial step and resolve the status of Kosovo by recognizing it as an independent, sovereign nation. This will not be easy for the Serbian people and for their government in Belgrade. We must help Serbia understand the choices it faces. Mr. Chairman, the topic of our hearing today is not an interesting intellectual exercise. We are dealing with one of the most significant and volatile problems in Europe today. Finding a solution is urgent, and taking significant steps now to recognize the independence of Kosovo is essential. I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses.
Is there anybody here who wants to make an opening statement? Mr. Rohrbacher.
Let me thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank Mr. Lantos for the leadership that you two have provided on this issue. It's time to get on with it.
I can't hear you.
It's time to get on with it. We've wasted so much time while the lives of these people just go on and on. The young people in Kosovo feel helpless, and unless we move and act to recognize that they have the rights as everyone else to control their own destiny through the ballot box, they're going to be just as angry as Americans would be in the same situation. We shouldn't permit the rights of our young people ever to be violated such, and we should consider the people of Kosovo just as on an equal level with our own people. It's time to get on with this job, give them their rights, give them the right to vote and control their own country, and to have a democratically elected government. This administration, if it is serious about promoting democracy, which we hear from the President all the time, can start with Kosovo, and it's a great place to start because we can do it so easily. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired, and we will move to our panel, our first panel. I welcome Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Nick Burns. As Undersecretary, he oversees U.S. policy in each region of the world and serves in the Senior Career Foreign Service position at the Department. During his tenure as Ambassador to Greece, the U.S. strengthened our partnership in the Balkans and increased trade, investment, and people-to-people programs. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Ambassador.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lantos, members of the committee, I've submitted a statement for the record. I will not read that. I will spare you the full reading of the testimony. I thank you for the interest of this committee in Kosovo. It is a vital issue for the United States. Both the President and Secretary Rice have indicated that recently, and we believe that 2005 is going to be a vital year for the Balkans itself. On July 11th, the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina are going to commemorate a tragic event, the execution of 8,000 men and boys by General Ratko Mladic and his forces at Srebrenica on July 11th, 1995. That was the worst war crime in Europe since the Nazi era. From there, of course, we'll also commemorate in November the 10th anniversary of the Dayton Accords, where the United States stepped in, ended the war in Bosnia, and negotiated, I think quite brilliantly led by Richard Holbrooke, the peace there. And of course, in 2005, the people of Kosovo have to turn their attention to their future, and it is time to determine the political future of the people of that region. President Bush and Secretary Rice have placed a very high priority on that. We understand that we need to finish the work in 2005 of bringing the Balkans into the democratic community of nations, into association with the European Union and with NATO, to end the divisive strife that has been so much a part of that region's history for the last 15 years. And we understand that the United States has a major role to play. We have credibility in the region because of our past leadership, and we are indicating today in this testimony a renewed attempt now by the United States government to be active in Bosnia, to be active in Kosovo, and active in convincing the government of Serbia-Montenegro to do the right thing, and that is to turn over General Mladic for prosecution at The Hague, is to find Radovan Karadzic and turn him over for prosecution at the War Crimes Tribunal. So we see 2005 as a year of renewed emphasis. And as part of this, Secretary Rice has asked me, Mr. Chairman, to travel to the region in early June, to Bosnia-Herzegovina, to Kosovo, as well as to Belgrade, in order to advance the U.S. national interest in seeing progress made on all of these issues, particularly on the Kosovo issue in 2005. Kosovo is perhaps the most difficult issue remaining in the region. And we believe, as Mr. Lantos has just said, that the status quo of Kosovo's undefined status is no longer sustainable, desirable, or acceptable. It doesn't satisfy any of the parties or any of the people of the region, and it does leave open the possibility of renewed ethnic violence. And we believe that failure to address Kosovo's status in the near term risks undoing much of what we have achieved in the Balkans over the last 10 years. We want to do that in a way that brings Serbia and Montenegro fully into the democratic community of nations. This is an administration priority. So we do see 2005 as a year of decision. We're going to be working with the United Nations and with our European allies to launch a process to determine Kosovo's final status.
I think it's self-evident that no parent is ever ready for parenthood, and no nation is ever ready for nationhood. And having said this, which I think is a statement of universal applicability, it's self-evident that the people of Kosovo are every bit as ready to be an independent democratic republic as many, many other nations on the face of this planet, more ready than many members of the United Nations. My question to you, Secretary Burns, relates to Serbia's interest in this whole matter. Because it is my judgment that the faster Kosovo becomes an independent republic, the faster Serbia's interests can be promoted. As I stated in my opening remark, Serbia will not be able to participate in any European or Euro-Atlantic entity until the break between Kosovo and Serbia is final and complete. So while many posit this whole issue as one where Kosovars are interested in independence and Serbia is not, it is opposed to it, it is my judgment that there is a coincidence of interest. There is a parallelity of interest. Namely, since Kosovo clearly will not permanently remain part of Serbia, this is self-evident. The sooner the break comes, the better it is for the Kosovar Albanians, but it is also better for Serbia in achieving its legitimate goals as a constituent part of Europe.
Thank you very much, and I join my colleagues in congratulating the administration at long last, determining that it's time to do something. My first reaction is, you're late. But that set aside, it's time to get on with it, as I mentioned in my opening statement, and I'm very pleased that this administration has decided yes, let's get on with this and try to find a solution. The solution to me seems very easy, and I don't know why we have to set up this convoluted process of having a United Nations advisor down there. We have senior UN diplomat determine if the final status talks are ready, and then a senior European negotiator. What's to negotiate? What's to determine? The people of Kosovo have a right to determine their own future through the ballot box, just as every other group of people in this world. There's nothing to determine there. Either we are Americans and we believe that, or we don't. The President talks about democracy as being an important part of his administration, and a very important goal, important value that we're putting forward, a priority value, let's say. Well, this is the way to prove it right here. Why should we be taking into consideration what the Serbs and the Montenegrins want to do about the political future of the Kosovars? It's the Kosovars who are the ones who need to determine that. If we believe in democracy, it's time to let the people of Kosovo have an election, determine their own leaders. And Mr. Ambassador, if this is going to cause a problem with the Serbians or the Montenegrins, the worst that would happen is they would threaten to create, you know, a warlike situation again. Do you believe that if the United States will guarantee that this new democracy that's being established will be protected as we will join our other European allies and do so against Serbian aggression, do you really believe that the Serbs would commit an act of aggression and the war would start again?
If we imposed independence, or if we imposed continued association with Serbia, we wouldn't be giving the responsibility to the people of the province to determine their future. So that's why we're in favor of a negotiation. It's the best way to deter violence and lead to peace.
Mr. Ambassador, with due respect, imposing independence through a democratic vote is not imposing anything on anybody. I mean, permitting somebody to have a free vote is not imposing anything on them. It's giving them the right to determine for themselves what their destiny is going to be. And the United Nations, for this administration to turn to the United Nations as a vehicle for actually accomplishing something in foreign policy is pretty mind-boggling. The fact that we understood that the United Nations couldn't be trusted in Iraq, and we went into Iraq unilaterally, and being the chairman of the Investigative and Oversight Subcommittee on this committee, and being involved in investigating the oil for food scandal, I think this is the last time that we want to put our faith in the United Nations to come up with a solution for something like what's going on in the Balkans. So I would suggest let's get unilateral about this and recognize that we are the ones who will make the policy, especially if we hold true to our principles of belief in democracy, which we're fighting for in Iraq. And if we hold true in Iraq, we're going to succeed, and it's going to be a lot easier for us to succeed and prove our beliefs in democracy in Kosovo. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. I'd now like to introduce our witnesses for the second panel. Our first witness of the second panel is the Most Reverend Mark Sopi, Apostolic Administrator of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Prizren. Bishop Sopi is effectively the Roman Catholic Bishop of Kosova. Born in Kosova, he began his studies in philosophy and theology in Zagreb, Croatia, and completed his degrees in Rome. In 1995, Monsignor Mark Sopi was nominated by the Holy See as Kosova's bishop. During the conflict in Kosovo, Bishop Sopi played a major role in saving lives, and after the war he participated in the reconstruction effort to rebuild schools, hospitals, and religious sites. Our second witness is the Reverend Lush Gergi, General Administrative Vicar of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Prizren. Father Gergi is a Roman Catholic priest, a Franciscan, who serves the parish of Binka, Kosova. Born in Kosova, he completed his studies in Rome with a doctorate in social psychology and a dissertation on the role of Albanian women in family and society. He is the author of numerous books and is best known as the author of an authorized multi-volume biography on the life and work of Mother Teresa, which has been translated into 20 languages. Father Georgi is the president of the Mother Teresa Society in Kosova, which has achieved international recognition for helping war victims. It isn't generally known, but Mother Teresa is Albanian. Other nations claim her, but she's Albanian. Our fourth witness is Shirley Cloyes DioGuardi, Balkan Affairs Advisor to the Albanian American Civic League. She's written and lectured widely about the Balkan conflict and has made 30 trips to the region, including 13 to Kosova, since the end of the war in 1999. She has participated in several hearings before this committee in the past and proposed the first congressional hearing on the Albanian dimension of the Balkan conflict, which was held in February 1995, with representatives from all of the Albanian lands in the former Yugoslavia. This was done in conjunction with the historic addition of Albania to the Righteous Among Nations section of the U.S. Memorial Holocaust Museum in a public ceremony in Washington, D.C., the result of years of work to bring to international attention the story of how every Jew who made it to Albanian lands was saved during World War II. We request our witnesses to limit their opening statements to between 5 and 10 minutes, if at all possible. Your full statements will be made a part of the record, and we now turn to our first witness, Bishop Sopi.
Zotni Kryesus, Zotni Congressman, ju falenderoj që më keni dhënë mundësinë me mujtën këtu, edhe unë mi qiten pikpamjet e mia sa I përket çështjes Kosovës.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, honorable members of Congress. I feel honored today to be here, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak before you and express my views on the current situation in Kosovo.
Kishte me qenën më mirë që feja më nda prej politike.
I do believe that it is best for the religion to be always separate from politics,
Se politika vetëm I bën dëm fejes.
because politics can only harm the religion.
Unë jam I bindën se edhe me këtë rastin tonë gjithashtu pasojat e një simpatie apo pjesëmarrje në politikë janë që kishat edhe janë rënua.
And I do believe that the engagement in politics of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Kosovo has to some extent caused the anger of the extremist elements during the riots to kind of attack their buildings.
Po, kishte me qenën shumë mirë
It would be way better
që mu marrë më tepër me gjëna fetare,
for the religious leaders to really deal with religion,
edhe jo vetëm kisha, por edhe populli I serb I cili jeton në Kosovë,
and not only the Serbian Orthodox Church, but also the Serbian people in Kosovo
mu pajtue me realitetin e ri që është Kosova.
should finally accept the new reality in which Kosovo lives today,
Atëherë kishte me pasën shumë më tepër paqë,
so that we could come to peace sooner.
se për ndryshe si të identifikohet me politikën e Beogradit,
But for as long as the Serbian Orthodox Church is a frontrunner for the Belgrade's policies,
atëherë konsiderohet si anmike e popullit shqiptar.
then it may be considered as well. It may be considered a political enemy as well for the
E nuk është
people
çudi që atëherë do
in
të
Kosovo.
atakohet.
And it would not be. It would then suffer probably attacks that it did.
Në Kosovë ka pasur shumë lufta edhe në të kaluamën.
Kosovo has witnessed and undergone many wars in the past as well.
Por popullata nuk ka qenë e implikuar në luftë.
But most of the time, the civilian population was never directly involved in creating the war.
Mjerisht në këtë rast, është keq përdorur edhe popullata vendore.
Unfortunately, in the last Kosovo war, the Serb local population was used to get involved in the crimes that were being committed. And that's what has created more enmity.
Jam I mendimit që ne si kisha katolike, si kisha ortodokse, çdo bashkësi fetare të merret më tepër me gjëra fetare e politikën të lënë politikanëve.
I do believe that we as a Catholic Church, the Serbian Orthodox Church, and other religious communities should be mainly concerned with the religious issues rather than politics, and leave the politics to the politicians.
Na si kish katolike kemi pas dëshirë dhe kemi bashkëpunuar me të gjithë.
As Catholic Church of Kosovo, we have always been open to cooperate, and we have cooperated with all other religious institutions.
Dhe jemi të gatshëm që të bashkëpunojmë me të gjithë.
And we're ready to do so again now.
Por duhet që të kenë mirë kuptim edhe dialog me palën tjetër.
But we hope that in trying to do this, we will reach some understanding from the other side as well.
Ne do të kujdesemi për të gjithë, për të mirën e gjithëve.
We will do whatever we can for the good of everyone who lives in Kosovo.
Obligojnë parimet e ungjillore.
Because we're obliged to do that by our faith.
Shembulli I mirë I bijes tonë kosovare, Nën Terezës për Kalkute.
The best example of this would be the example of the work and life of Mother Teresa.
Po. Por gjithashtu edhe shembulli I mirë I Papës Madh Gjan Pauli II.
Or the example provided by the now late Pope John Paul II.
Letëm lejo që edhe unë të thëmë bendimin përfundimit çështës Kosovës.
In regards to the Kosovo final status, I'd just like to express my opinion finally.
Unë mendoj se nuk ka tjetër rrugë jashtë rrugës pavarësisë.
I do firmly believe that there is no other option for a final status for Kosovo other than full independence.
Sepse pavarësia e Kosovës nuk e rrezikon askën.
Because I do strongly believe that the independence of Kosovo would put no one in danger.
Besoj se kishte me kontribue për paqë, për qetësim, për parim edhe të mirën e të gjithëve.
Rather, it would contribute to developing further peace, prosperity, and economic development for the entire region.
Father Georgi.
Populli shqiptar në Kosovë është I lumtur dhe krenar se ka pasur dhe ka një bi, një motër dhe një nan që e ka paraqitur në mënyrë të shkëlqyeshme traditën, kulturën, krishtërimin ton, gjitha çka është më e mira e popullit shqiptar në dimensionet botërore.
We as Albanians are always happy to have had a mother, a daughter like Mother Teresa, who in the best possible way showed to the entire world our tradition of kindness, respect, and love for each other and for the people of the entire world.
Ajo ishte për ne frymëzim edhe gjatë sprovave të rënda prej 1981-s e deri në 99 dhe mbetet si frymëzim për gjithë ne.
She has always been an idol for us, and especially during the worst times that we have experienced in Kosovo from 1981 till 1999, and even today, she is one of the best loved daughters that our nation has ever given birth to.
Strategjia jon gandiane apo tereziane e ishte pikërisht kjo që të vuajmë çdo gjë për të ikur luftës dhe konfliktit të çfarëdo lloji.
Following her example, we did agree to be patient and be peaceful and resist the sufferings at all extents so that we would avoid greater conflict.
Megjithatë, lufta ndodhi dhe me këtë rast falenderojmë në rend të parë Shtetet e Bashkuara të Amerikës, por edhe Evropën që ndërhyri për ta shpëtuar një popull nga shkatërrimi I tërësishëm.
Regardless, the war happened, and I do want to thank you, the United States and Europe as well, for intervening on time to stop the extermination of the entire Albanian people of Kosovo.
Kjo ishte një lindje e re për Kosovën, por duhet të vazhdojmë së bashku deri te ajo çka është qëllimi përfundimtar, sikur i një fëmijë i cili kur lind duhet të përcjellet jo vetëm në lindje, por edhe në rritje deri te mosha madhore.
And with the international community's intervention, Kosovo was liberated, and that marked a rebirth for Kosovo. But that is, Kosovo now is just like a child who's been born and needs some advice and needs some caring till it's completely grown up. And we're on our way to growing up and becoming independent just like a child would.
Në Kosovë kemi një përvojë të mrekullueshme shumë shekullore të dialogut ndërfetar, të dialogut ndëretnik dhe të dialogut ndërkishtar.
In Kosovo, we do have a wonderful experience for over centuries of inter-ethnic, inter-religious, and inter-church dialogue.
Dhe jemi një rast I rrallë për mirë që dy bashkësitë fetare, ajo e krishterë dhe muslimane, jo vetëm bashkëjetojnë, por edhe bashkëpunojnë vllazërisht, sepse jemi dy fish vëllezër, edhe si shqiptar, edhe si fetar.
And the case of Kosovo would probably be one of the very few examples in the entire world where two main religions coexist. And not only do they coexist, but also they do cooperate together very sincerely, because we are, as Christians and as Muslims, we're brothers, and because we belong to the same nation, and we're brothers because we do believe in God.
Po ashtu dëshirojmë ta vazhdojmë dialogun ndërkishtar mes dy kishave motrat e krishtera, që është më I vështirësuar jo për çështje fetare apo kishtare, por më tepër për çështje politike.
But we are also willing to extend our cooperation and further our cooperation with our with the Serbian Orthodox Church, because the two churches we believe can coexist and cooperate together, and this has been difficult not because of religious issues but because of political issues.
Prandaj Kosova, shteti I pavarur, do të ishte një model për krejt Ballkanin, por edhe më gjerë I dialogut ndëretnik, I dialogut ndërfetar dhe I dialogut ndërkishtar dhe I bashkëjetesës së popujve dhe feve të ndryshme.
Therefore, Kosovo, as an independent country, would provide the best example in the Balkans as a country where inter-ethnic, inter-religious, and inter-church dialogue would be possible and implemented.
Na ndihmoni që të lirohemi prej urrëties e prej së keqes, që me ndihmën e Zotit, me përkrahjen e Amerikës dhe të botës, vërtet Kosova të jetë një pikë e sigurt e së ardhmës jo vetëm për ne, por edhe të botës mbar.
We hope that with your help we will come to be a country where everybody will be free and respected, and that would be a good example of coexistence, not only for the region where we are, but for the entire world. And we believe that with the help of the United States and the help of God, that will be achievable.
And now, Ms. DioGuardi.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for your leadership in holding this hearing, and also you and Congressman Lantos for introducing House Resolution 24 supporting the United States recognition of Kosovo's independence now. I think in order to address Kosovo's current economic and political status and U.S. foreign policy in the region, looking at final status in particular, we have to talk a little bit about the history for the last 2 decades of our administration. And with all due respect to Ambassador Burns, I cannot share his pride in the 20 years of activity on the part, or I should say perhaps inactivity on the part of the administration. As Congressman Dana Rohrabacher said earlier, we're a little late. It's very good what's happening now in terms of returning to the issue of the Balkans. But when we talk about pride, I think we have to talk about the House International Relations Committee. The House International Relations Committee can be proud because it has consistently responded to the conflict in the Southeast Europe in the last century, in the current century, consistently supported aspirations for freedom and democracy on the part of peoples in the region who suffered from almost 50 years of communism, and in the case of Albanians, from racism and genocide. If you go back 18 years, when this really began, the initiative in the House, it was Congressman Lantos and then Congressman DioGuardi that introduced with 57 colleagues H. Conres 162, which exposed the egregious abuse of human rights of Kosovar's Albanians and called for justice. Now, unfortunately, at that time, the State Department, under pressure from former colleagues and American friends of Slobodan Milosevic who had worked in the region, opposed every initiative by the House. And ultimately, Congressman Lantos and DioGuardi prevailed in getting a hearing. But what we see from 1989 on, after Milosevic invades and occupies Kosova, we see a pattern that continued for a decade, and the consequences were really quite terrible. I mean, Vukovar gets attacked, House opposes it, the International Relations Committee opposes it, the administration doesn't act. Kosova is occupied brutally, House opposes, Congressman Lantos introduces another resolution, the administration doesn't act. Bosnia is attacked, concentration camps were concealed, 5 members of our State Department resign in opposition. Nothing happens. The only time there was an exception was when President George Herbert Walker Bush announced his Christmas warning in 1993, warning Slobodan Milosevic that if you start to move in on Kosova in a military way, if you wage war, then you're going to be in trouble. There'll be dire consequences. But for the most part, state has just, embraced a policy of appeasement and containment. And then in February of '98, the Christmas warning was violated. And the Serbian military and paramilitary troops attacked Kosova, raped, pillaged, and murdered their way across the country, so that by the time the United States was forced to lead NATO airstrikes against Serbia in March '99, Serbian military and paramilitary forces had killed more than 300,000 men, women, and children in Bosnia, at least 10,000 in Kosova. A couple thousand are still missing, and had displaced more than 4 million people in Southeast Europe. Now, there was a short period of time from March until June of '99 when the airstrikes were being conducted that Congress and the administration came together at that point and realized they were going to have to bring down Milosevic and his henchmen. And the American people broadly supported the government in that, especially as they saw Albanians being herded in cattle cars to the border and thrown into camps. However, when the war came to an end with the capitulation of Milosevic, the United States agreed to defer any decision regarding Kosovo's final status. And what you see at that point is a reemergence of the State Department's embrace of its historical Belgrade-centric attitude. And I think that the evidence, though, of the past 6 years is that delaying final status has been a mistake. And it's time for the administration to look at House Resolution 24 as the blueprint for going forward. The worst thing that's happened, I think, in the post-war period is that reactionary forces in Belgrade and in Washington have succeeded, and we heard some of this today in part, succeeded in creating in the international media and in the minds of some of our government officials that there's a false parity between the perpetrators of state-sponsored terrorism and the Albanian and Bosnian victims of genocide, between the perpetrators and some individual Albanians who retaliated against individual Serbs. And so in this period, we see that the sovereign state of Serbia has been able to miscast Albanians of the Balkans as the source of violence in the region. And one of the reasons they've been able to do it, and my colleagues, Bishop Sophie in particular, spoke about this, they've been able to portray as Albanians as Muslims in the heart of Europe. And in a post-9/11 world, they've gone further and said, well, these Muslims are a potentially terrorist force in the heart of Europe. It's easy to convince Westerners of this who are largely untutored in the realities of Eastern Europe. So Belgrade's efforts to portray Kosovar Albanians as unworthy of their right to freedom then came to a culmination with the tragic events of March 2004. I won't go into that. Other members of this panel already have. I only want to say 2 things. 19 people died, yes, but 11 of those 19 were Albanians. 8 were Serbs. And it's a tragedy, but it wasn't orchestrated. And in my opinion, the world should be surprised not that there was any violence in Kosova in 6 years, but that there's been so little. with 70% of the population under the age of 30, more than 60% unemployed. In the post-war period, and notably after March 2004, it again has only been the House International Relations Committee that grasped the danger of delaying Kosovo's final status and keeping it on life support. And as we all know, you and Congressman Lantos introduced House Resolution 28, then 24, and you did it, in my opinion, and I think it's important for people to realize this, not just because you're interested in respecting the dignity of Kosovars and the human rights of all peoples. You also did it, and this is what our administration has to know, because you realized it was in the vital interest of the United States. And I'll summarize my testimony totally. Vital interest, not to create a seeming contradiction between calling for free and fair elections and democracy in Iraq and Ukraine, on the one hand, and then denying the democratic process in Kosovo, something about which Congressman Rohrabacher has spoken so eloquently. It's in the vital interest of the United States to have a progressive Muslim Albanian majority in the heart of Europe. It's in the vital interest of the United States that Albanians are the most pro-American, pro-Western ethnic group in Southeast Europe and maybe in all of Europe. When America was attacked on 9/11, many countries danced in the streets, while Kosovar Albanians lit candles, had vigils, and said, "We are with you." It's in the vital interest of the United States to provide genuine support for the democratization of all societies emerging from communism and ultranationalism. And this means that it must come to grips with the fact that U.S. policy in the past 15 years has failed to denazify and democratize Serbia. It's not enough simply to pick up Mladic and Karadzic to come to grips with the situation in which Serbia continues to be a quasi-mafia state that destabilizes its neighbors, and Serbs are being hurt by that. They have historically. I know there are improvements, but there are a lot of Serbs that have been held hostage, along with the Kosovar Serbs. And my last statement would be that it is the Kosovar Serbs that need to be at the negotiating table in the fall with Kosovar Albanians, not Belgrade. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mrs. DioGuardi. Mr. Rohrabacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Joe and Shirley DioGuardi for the hard work that they put out on this issue and this cause over the years. And it's been vitally important that a group of people in desperate situations in another part of the world were given direction on how to state their case and how to make sure people understood what was going on through the very complicated democratic process in the United States. So I think Joe and Shirley have done a tremendous job in making sure that we got the picture of what was going on instead of a blurred picture of what was going on there. I'd like to make one note for the record, Mr. Chairman. That is that when we do talk about the United Nations, what the administration seems to believe that the United Nations now should play a role in this process, and we're going to have United Nations representatives there as some negotiators or reconciliators, democratic reconciliators. I just wonder, Mr. Chairman, if those United Nations representatives will be from democratic countries or not. And I'm sorry I didn't have our representative here from the administration. It seems that perhaps a large number of countries in the United Nations are not democratic, and sending perhaps people from China or North Korea or you know, any of these other great countries, Burma, to come to help the Kosovars negotiate for democracy wouldn't really be of great service. And that's why the United States has to make decisions rather than leaving it up to the United Nations. Because in the United Nations there is a tremendous, let's say, influence of people who do not believe in democracy and the value of liberty and justice. And with that said, let me ask the panel about some of the objections that people have. Ms. DioGuardi had just mentioned bugaboo of radical Islamic center right there in Europe. And let me ask, we have some Christian leaders here with us. Are you worried? You know what's going on among your fellow Kosovars, and you know that they're of another faith. Many of them are Muslims. Are you worried about radical Islam taking over in Kosovo and your faith being some way jeopardized by radical Muslims like you see in Iran or with bin Laden?
Ne nuk kemi frikë që me të vërtet dhe të vinë në islamizëm radikale. Por në qoftë se vazhdon një situatë e tillë, siç ka ardhur deri me tash, rrezikon me kaplue grupet e vogla, ndoshta edhe mu zhvillu përpara, po përndryshe nuk frigohemi se do të kenë ose do të mund të vinë në islamizëm radikal.
We're absolutely not worried that it will ever come to the point that we'll be overtaken by radical Islam. But I do think that if the status quo, is prolonged forever, then small extremist groups could emerge, and that could threaten to some extent. But I still do not believe that it will ever come to the point that radical Islam will over.
So his answer is, the longer that we refrain from letting the people of Kosovo have their rights to run their own country, the greater the chance that there will be radicalism will rise up among Muslims.
Populli i Kosovës ka beson edhe mbështetet shumë në demokracinë perëndimore, veçanërisht në demokracinë e juaj amerikane.
The people that be true, I'd agree with you, and I'd also add that the people of Kosovo have always believed in democracy, and especially in the American democracy.
Në qoftë se I duket se me të vërtet nuk ka gjë për kësaj shprese të cilën e pret me ardhen prej Evropës perëndimore apo prej jush, por ma konkret kisha me thënë Evropa nuk besoj se është në gjendje përmes gjithë në çështjen tonë politike. Jeni ju ata të cilët keni filluar këtë